Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a couple of flavored Imperial Stouts, always a favorite of mine. We're going to be starting with Great Divide Brewing Company. We've done quite a few of their beers. In fact, I think we've done a standard version of this beer, but this one's flavored. This is their S'mores version of their Yeti, very famous Imperial Stout. This one clocks in at 9.5% ABV. Great Divide is based in Denver, Colorado, and this one specifically was brewed with a blend of chocolate, marshmallow, and additional spices. Moving on to beer number 2. This is a collaborative brew between Perrenial Artisan Ales and Second Shift Brewing Company, both of which are based in St. Louis, Missouri. We've done one or two Perrenial Artisan Ales beers, not a ton. Don't see too many of them, but I grab them when I do. This one's called Intentionally Indulgent Imperial Stout, of course, 11.5% ABV on this one, and it's been brewed with coffee, chocolate, and vanilla beans. So we've got two completely different approaches to the same style, one a little lower ABV than the other, but they both sound great. They're both by brewers that I know well and really think that they produce good stuff. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in, starting with Great Divide Brewing Company's Smores Yeti. This one clocks in at 9.5% ABV. Okay, so jumping right in with the first beer of today's flavored Imperial Stout review, we have got Great Divide Brewing Company's Smores Yeti. This is a s'mores flavored version of their standard Yeti, which even by itself is a really delicious Imperial Stout. This one specifically clocks in at 9.5% ABV. It's been brewed with chocolate, marshmallows, and additional spices. And Great Divide, of course, is based in Denver, Colorado. So first things first, label art. As always, they've got their Yeti roasting marshmallows over the fire. This time he's joined by a friendly rabbit. I don't know how well that the camera's picking that up, but trust me, it's on there. So they always have that Yeti on their Yeti beer, which is awesome. Second thing, if you've watched my channel for a while or you've come across some different flavored stouts, porters, you might have caught by now that s'mores is one of my absolute favorite desserts in the world. I think it's just the combination of ingredients, the simplicity of it, but I absolutely love all things s'mores. And I have tried every s'mores beer that I have ever seen. I've bought and tried. For my money, it is a challenging flavor profile to mimic in a beer. There's something about that combination of ingredients that seems hard to pull off. I've only had one or two out of about 10 or 11 I've tried that have kind of sort of gotten it, and the rest really not even close. But I still enjoy the beers as a rule, so let's jump in and see how well Great Divide's Yeti in s'mores flavor comes to approximating the delicious treat we know as s'mores. All right, big old can here. This will not all fit in the glass, that's a fact. Oh, absolutely pitch black, just as a normal Yeti is. It's not super duper thick, but it's got a bit of resistance pouring out of the can. Beautiful, beautiful black color. I'm going to back off here because it's forming a nice head. We want to give it room. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that is positively lovely. Absolutely pitch black, as you would expect from an Imperial Stout. We can see the head formed very thick, very lush, very creamy. It's got quite a pungent aroma. I can smell it from here. I'm a good 1.5 feet away from that glass. Not really breathing, with intention here. And the flavors are really already starting to get to me. So let's get right up over the glass and see what we've got. Oh, yeah. Wow, actually, there's some underlying subtleties and notes I didn't expect to find in the aroma profile here. So you do get the roastiness of it right away. It's a big, dark Imperial Stout. And you do get some underlying maltiness that goes along with it, but by and large on the nose. Yes, the chocolate's there. There's a little underlying sweetness, but I'm detecting what almost smells like a cinnamon honey-made graham cracker. So they're the graham crackers honey glazed and then dusted with cinnamon. That is what this is smelling like quite strongly to me. I did not anticipate it. So it says spices. Maybe spices, they added some honey, maybe some cinnamon just to change it up a bit. Perhaps they actually used some cinnamon graham crackers in the mix in this recipe. I don't know. But what I do know is that it smells absolutely delicious. So we're going to top this off just a tick. Gently, we don't need to reform that head here. Just topping it off just a tick. And we're going to jump right in and see what this one's about. Oh, yeah. Big, big, delicious beer. Positively packed with flavor. And it's got a lot of layers of complexities that are moving in and out. So, where does it start? As you start to agitate around the palate, there's two things you notice right away about the flavors that start hitting you before you swallow. One is that kind of cinnamony, honey cinnamon kind of aroma I was picking up on the nose really is translating into this flavor. And that was quite prevalent. It's that with this underlying deep, rich roastiness, for which Yeti is well known. Immediately upon swallowing, the first thing that I did get was even more pronounced of that honey and cinnamon. It is that exact and specific combination that it tastes like. I'm not suggesting that's what they put in here, nor am I suggesting that it's a cinnamon graham cracker, but that's the flavor that's coming through to me. And let me tell you, it's absolutely delicious. Immediately behind that, boatload of rich, intense, deeply, deeply, deeply roasted malts. There's a little subtlety of dark chocolate involved with these malts. There's a little coffee-like quality to it without it tasting like actual a cup of coffee. Again, we're getting into this territory where it's really related to the roasting side of, say, a French or Italian roast, where they pull the beans just before the smoke point on the edge of being burned. And there's not really an underlying smokiness to this at all. Really no suggestion of smoke. It doesn't remind me of campfire. It's not Rauch beer. Just very intensely bold, rich, deeply, deeply, deeply roasted malts. And it tastes like a boatload of them because that is intense. For sure, the chocolate comes through. It does put me more in mind of semi-sweet chocolate, such as one might put chips in chocolate chip cookies. Semi-sweet, not milk chocolate. Very, very rich, very intensely chocolatey. It's got, more cacao than that sweetness. So there's this underlying suggestion of sweetness, even though this is not a milk stout. And then the kind of suggestion of sweetness is certainly coming through from the marshmallows they add in here. And I think what's really kind of playing that side up is this kind of sweet, like honey cinnamon flavor that's kind of coming through in the mix. So there's a lot happening in this beer. Everything that I got was absolutely delicious. So we're going to jump back in for body and mouthfeel, explore the flavor development a bit more in the finish, and talk about it. Body on this one is a solid medium heavy, which is really where I would expect a 9.5% stout to fall. Mouthfeel has got some resistance, but it's not crazy resistant and it's not flat, which again is more or less where I would expect the 9.5% stout to fall. So it's really checking both of those boxes exactly what I anticipated. In terms of how the flavor continues to develop on subsequent sips, it does absolutely intensify. And I could tell you, if I'm sitting here sipping on this, thinking about s'mores and what I just swallowed, there are elements of this that do indeed remind me of the s'mores dessert without it being sweet. But do I think it tastes as the closest approximation to s'mores you can get in beer form? No, I don't. And it's really that lack of sweetness. It's the dominant factor. But it's also the fact that the average s'mores is not made with a honey cinnamon graham cracker. It's made with the standard graham cracker. Not that there's anything wrong with using honey cinnamon. Frankly, I think they're the better cracker. But in the traditional dessert, it's not on it. But that does come through in this. So really, the vibe I'm getting is, here's our twist on a s'mores in beer form. And the big twist to the s'more is, instead of a standard honey graham cracker or standard non-honey glazed graham cracker, it's got this honey cinnamon. And it really, really is truly delicious and pairs so well with this malt bill. It really helps bring this beer together. So is it exactly what I think of when I think of s'mores? No. Is it absolutely delicious what I'm getting? You betcha. I appreciate that Brewers licensed that experimentation, and frankly, for my money, I think it paid off. I think the beer is actually better for it, because this is truly, truly delicious. In terms of what happens on the end of the finish, it's a pretty big, bold, pungent beer. The finish is quite long. The intensity does drop off relatively smoothly down a bell curve, and then it kind of quickly drops off, but it's what lingers in the back. A little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of roasty, kind of the coffee type side that I was talking about, and then intense dark chocolate, slight bitterness and roastiness from the underlying malt bill. And it really does cling to the back of the palate. It's still quite pungent. Very, very delicious beer. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's review, which is the collaborative brew between Perrenial Artisan Ales and Second Shift Brewing Company. This one's called Intentionally Indulgent, and it clocks in at 11.5% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's Imperial Stout review, we've got a collaborative brew between Perrenial Artisan Ales and Second Shift Brewing Company, both of which are located in St. Louis, Missouri. This one is called Intentionally Indulgent. It clocks in at 11.5% ABV, and it's been brewed with chocolate, coffee, and vanilla beans. So we're looking at kind of a namesake, I think, ingredients list. Intentionally Indulgent. So coffee, chocolate, vanilla. I'm not sure exactly what to expect, but being that this is a standard stout, not a milk stout, I do think it probably is going to be quite rich and quite indulgent. So I've had quite a few beers from Second Shift Brewing. I've only had one or two before from Perrenial Artisan Ales, but I do know that those that I have had have been very good. And I always like to see local craft brewers doing collaborations together. You know, that's part of the thing I like about the community the most is just how friendly everybody is, always helping to build each other up. So whenever we get these collaborative brews, it's always great to see. Nonetheless, let's talk about this label art. I'm not sure exactly what it's supposed to be, but it does look almost like a slice of drippy, multi-layered cake here is what it most resembles to me, with some, you know, fancy chocolate syrup, little artistry drizzling down the sides. Nonetheless, very nice looking. Even the label art looks indulgent. So let's get this cracked gently. All right. And get this poured right in the stout glass. Ooh, that's quite dark. It's got a bit of thickness to it. It's not super thick. Actually, I take that back. That is pretty stinking thick. Wow. Okay, that's a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. And man, that aroma hits you right away. Right away. Okay, so I'm going to get up right on it for a proper sniff. Visually, as expected for an Imperial Stout, it is indeed absolutely jet black. I mean, we're talking pitch black here. Formed a decent head here. It wasn't that huge rush, quite thick as I said. There's a good bit of carbonation, so I expect a lot of that is just going to disappear, have a nice little fine pad and a little outer ring, which I'm already starting to see that be the case. Let's give it a sniff. Okay, right up on it. Yeah, this smells, wow, insanely rich, insanely rich. So I can tell you, of the additive ingredients, every single one of them speaks to me quite clearly in that aroma. The coffee, the chocolate, and the vanilla. It's all in there. It's all very detectable. Also noticeably present is an underlying very richly roasted malt bill. All of the classic bits that went into this beer come through quite clearly in the aroma. And I'm expecting that it's going to be a similar story in the flavor profile. So let's just jump right in and see what this one's about. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, that's a home run. Man, that is rich. That is big, that is bold, that is pungent, that is flavor forward. It is rich, multi-layered. Wow. Oh, that's a really good stout, guys. Really good. Okay, so Everything I picked up in the flavor, rather in the aroma, is coming through quite clearly in this flavor profile. First thing I noticed as I was agitating around the palate, I wasn't really thinking that much about body and mouthfeel. I was just noticing how relatively flavor forward before I even swallowed the intensity of the flavor was. And swishing around on the palate, and indeed on first sip, there is this sweet sensation. Now, I'm going to reread this, make sure I didn't misread it. Nope, it's just a standard Imperial Stout. It says nothing about being a milk stout, and indeed, it doesn't mention any addition of lactose. So I think what's happening here is, which is relatively common, and I've experienced this many times, vanilla specifically. That ingredient, your brain naturally seems to associate this sweetness to that flavor. And especially in big beers that have a little bit of a boozy back, I think that the vanilla naturally kind of binds to that side of it. And while it's not sweet, it presents itself with the suggestion of sweetness. So this is not like drinking a milk stout that has lactose added, but part of the underlying layer of it kind of gives this overwhelming suggestion. And really, it's kind of a mind trick because you're thinking, wow, this is so rich and dark and earthy and roasty with this underlying malt bill, the chocolate underneath it, the coffee, but then your brain is kind of triggering this sweet sensation. So it is a very interesting beer. In terms of what happens behind that, the coffee comes through full force, and I don't know exactly what blend of coffee that they used, but it's really, really nice. It tastes like a very bold, pungently brewed cup. So a lot of grinds to the amount of water added. It's quite bold. It's quite present. The chocolate in here comes through almost fudge-like. I would say it's this dense, rich chocolate. It's not necessarily dark or bitter chocolate, but it's not milk chocolate. It's very fudge-like. And then you're getting this underlying malt bill that's also very, very big, very present, and very rich and very roasty. And that's very much binding with that underlying coffee as well. So there's a lot of flavor that's happening here. I'm going to jump in again, think on this body and mouthfeel, explore this flavor development and how it finishes out a bit more. But I can tell you, first sip, really, really delicious. Sip two, here we go. Oh, that's bold. Bold and intense. The body has a lot of breadth to it. It's quite a weighty body. I would say it's not super heavy, but it's not light either. It's maybe on that border between medium heavy and heavy. It has a ton of presence. The mouthfeel is quite thick. It's quite viscous. The mouthfeel feels really where I expected it would be for a stout in this ABV range, which is to say a ton of resistance. The body has a ton of weight, but it's not quite the upper echelon. It's very, very close to what I expected, maybe just dialed back just one click. In terms of flavor intensifying on second sip, that's absolutely true. And I'll tell you on second sip, that suggestion of sweetness that I was getting from the vanilla becomes quite a bit more clear that really what's happening is the vanilla is binding with the slight booziness this beer has. It's a high ABV beer. There really is no sweetness here. And the chocolate that's in here, I think, is taking on this fudgy undertone also because of that alcohol and vanilla binding. So there isn't sweetness to speak of. It's very dark, it's very roasty, it's very intense, it's very rich, but the way that the flavors play upon each other does kind of on the front side give you this initial impression of sweetness, but it's not sweet. It's not a sweet beer at all. It's not a milk stout. It's a very dark, rich, dense stout, and it's very, very tasty. In terms of the length of the finish, this one actually surprises me a little bit. For how bold and pungent these flavors are, the finish really is not super long at all. If anything, I would say for an Imperial Stout, it's probably average, but it doesn't really get out of that realm. There's no underlying bitters to kind of push it back. There's no barrel aging that just kind of haunts on the palate like they typically do. So this one, yeah, it's nice. And it's got a nice big wet round finish to it. but it's not super long in terms of the length. Overall, this is a fantastic beer. I really, really like what they did here. The flavors are bold, they're intense, they're well chosen, clearly quality ingredients. This is just a well put together Imperial Stout. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with Great Divide Brewing Company's Smores Yeti, Imperial Stout brewed with chocolate, marshmallow, and spices. 9.5% ABV on this one. They're based in Denver, Colorado. So in terms of aroma, the aroma on this beer was quite large. Well above average. You could really smell the underlying malt bill. You could smell kind of that marshmallow back. And it did actually have a slight honey and cinnamon-like aroma to it, which surprised me, but made sense once I got into the flavor. Overall, the aroma gets a 9 out of 10. For the taste. Taste on this one was extremely enjoyable. Do I personally think this was the best representation of s'mores in beer form I've had to date? No. But do I think that it was more or less a s'mores flavored beer? Yes, I do, but with a slight twist. What I picked up in the aroma, that kind of honey underlying and that cinnamon, translated into the glass. So really, and I talked about this a lot, what it felt like was they used a cinnamon honey-made graham, Nabisco makes those, for the graham cracker base that they put the beer on. So that's an interesting twist. Not traditional, but I really enjoyed it. It was very tasty. Overall, the taste gets a 9 out of 10. For the body, this was a big beer. The body on this had way more breadth to it, way more weight to it than you would expect for 9.5%. Truly impressive. It gets a 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel was a relatively similar story here. If anything, I thought that the mouthfeel was even more resistant and viscous and thick than the breadth that the body brought to the table. And sure, is it slightly out of the norm for the ABV? Yes, but this is an Imperial Stout, and it was not shy about presenting itself as such. Mouthfeel, I gave it 10 out of 10. For the finish, very long. Big, bold aromas, big, bold flavors. And they were really quite pungent and really extended the end of the finish. You don't always get this with a stout. You often get it with barrel aged, but this was not barrel aged. This was just intense roast with the added chocolate, marshmallow, and spices, and it really had quite a long finish here. Only docked 1 point. Finish gets a 9 out of 10. Head and retention, this one did beautifully. I can't even imagine what that would be like off of a nitro tap, but it did stellar to be poured at home. Head and retention gets a 10 out of 10. Appearance, as you would typically expect on an Imperial Stout, it was pitch black. That is textbook. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance of ingredients on this was phenomenal. Overall, I really enjoyed it. The only thing that I was thinking in the back of my brain, it's not a milk stout, it's a standard stout flavored like s'mores. That cinnamon and the honey, as delicious as it was maybe a little more present in the grand balance of the additive ingredients. I would have liked a little more marshmallow to come through, which to be fair is very challenging if it's not in a milk stout form. Marshmallow tends to get muddled and it just boosts up ABV because of all the natural inherent sugars in it. But sweetness doesn't present itself in a beer most often without lactose, since it cannot be converted to alcohol by yeast. But that being said, overall a very enjoyable beer, and I thought the balance was excellent. It gets a 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. Subjectively, I absolutely truly loved it. I love s'mores beers, and this one did not let me down. It was a very interesting take, but I really appreciated what they did here. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this beer lost 1 point in a handful of categories, but overall, in the grand scheme of things, I thought it was superb, and for my money, I think it is well deserving of a 10 out of 10 for the category, so I did give it that, a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Great Divide Brewing Company's Smores Yeti to a 96 out of 100. Make no mistake, this is top tier beer. If you're into s'mores flavored beers, this one is definitely for you. Moving on to beer number 2. Collaborative brew between Perrenial Artisan Ales and Second Shift Brewing Company, both based in St. Louis, Missouri, or Missouri if you're from that part of the country. This one called Intentionally Indulgent. Imperial Stout, as they both are. 11.5% ABV on this one, brewed with coffee, chocolate, and vanilla bean. So pretty indulgent list of ingredients in a non-milk stout formula here. So big, bold stout with indulgent flavors. So in terms of the aroma, almost immediately upon cracking this beer and starting to pour, I was just hit in the face with the aroma from a couple of feet away. And the closer you got, the more involved it got. That coffee really came through. The vanilla really came through. The chocolate really came through, as did the underlying malt bill. So I was getting tons of roasty, malty notes, that wonderful chocolate back, that coffee really, really quite present, and the vanilla just hanging out in the back. I mean, that's just an all-star lineup of ingredients, and it smelled the part. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, all of these ingredients presented themselves crystal clearly in this beer. I have to emphasize just how well put together this beer was. We'll get to that when we get to balance, but really, I mean, this is just, there's no wrong that can happen when you take these ingredients and you put a beer together well in a standard Imperial Stout form. I mean, it's just going to go well together. They all are symbiotic in nature, and they just work in this beer style. Very brilliant selection of ingredients, very bold, very pungent, all with their own voice. The taste does get a 10 out of 10. For the body was quite large. Okay, this is Imperial 11.5%. That's a pretty high ABV. It was very weighty, had a ton of breadth to it, but not quite top tier. I did dock 1 point here. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the mouthfeel on this beer was insanely resistant. I was really kind of taken aback at just how much viscosity and thickness and resistance it had when it was moving around the palate. Even more impressive than the already impressive body. The mouthfeel does get a 10 out of 10. For the finish, this is a category that kind of surprised me. And look, stouts can be all over the board no matter how big, bold, and pungent. And this is a great case example. It was a very clean, wet, round finish to the end, but the finish was not anywhere near the length that I was actually anticipating based on the absolute sheer pungency of the ingredient profile in this beer. Overall, it was really just an average finish. It was delicious, and it was, textbook to what you expect in terms of no dryness, but I expected with the pungency of ingredients to really push it out, and it didn't. It was average in that respect. It does get a 5 out of 10. Head and retention, another category. It did okay. Not great, not bad, just okay. Average, 5 out of 10. Appearance, this was textbook pitch black. Gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance. Now, the balance on this beer was just beyond exceptional, honestly, for my money. The ingredients that went into it, as well as pairing with that underlying malt bill, was just a masterclass in balance of ingredients in a beer. They had this really intricate malt bill that went in to create their Imperial Stout. Then they added coffee and chocolate and vanilla bean. All of that had its own voice. All of it paired absolutely beautifully and masterfully to each other, and nothing was vying for intention. I got malt bill, I got vanilla, I got coffee, I got chocolate, and they just kept interweaving, and there was no, oh boy, I wish I had a little more of this, I wish I had a little more of that. Oh, well, that's taking dominance. No, it was just perfectly balanced. It does get a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. Subjectively, I absolutely loved this beer. Truly delicious, big, bold flavors, balanced perfectly. It does get a 10 out of 10. Finally, an example of the style. Overall, this beer did very well in most categories. Finish, head, and retention, average, they are what they are. In the grand scheme of things, that doesn't make that big of a difference in the beer style, but I did account for the fact that it lost a fair bit of points in multiple categories. I did dock 1 here. It gets a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Perrenial Artisan Ales, collaboration with Second Shift Brewings, intentionally indulgent, to an 88 out of 100. So if we're looking at sheer base numbers here, we're looking at an 8-point spread, a 96 and an 88. And frankly, where this lost the most points was in categories that don't matter in the grand scheme of things. I have to count for them. They're part of the beer experience. It's part of what goes into making the style and style correctness. But both of these completely different beer drinking experiences, absolutely delicious. If you're into flavored Imperial Stouts, whether or not you like milk stout, standard stouts, both of these I would keep on my radar, and if you see them, grab them. You will not be disappointed. Folks, that is today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help the channel. If you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just click that notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you in the next one. Cheers.